I was 30 years old when I walked into that courtroom. The air smelled like old wood and fear, that distinct scent of polished mahogany mixed with the sweat of people whose lives are about to change forever. My hands were steady as I placed them on the witness stand. 22 years had passed since they threw me out like garbage, and now, here I was, about to throw them away for life. The prosecutor asked me to state my name for the record. I looked directly at them. My mother, my father, my uncle, my aunt, all sitting in a neat little row behind the defense table, their faces carefully arranged into expressions of confusion and hurt. Like they were the victims. Like I was the monster. And I smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough. Just enough for them to know that I remembered everything. Every single thing. My name, I said, my voice clear and loud in the silent room, is the name you tried to erase. Let me take you back. I don't remember being loved. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. When I try to recall moments of affection from before I turned 8, my mind produces nothing but static, like trying to tune into a radio station that doesn't exist. There might have been birthdays. There might have been Christmas mornings. But they're not filed under love in my memory. They're filed under performance. We lived in a house that looked perfect from the outside. You know the type. Cream-colored siding, a manicured lawn that my father obsessed over every Saturday, flower beds that my mother tended with the same cold precision she applied to everything else. We had a golden retriever named Sunshine, because of course we did. We were the family in the neighborhood that people waved to. The family that brought casseroles to newcomers. The family that everyone assumed had it all together. Inside that house, I was a problem to be managed. I learned early that children should be seen and not heard, and preferably not seen either. I learned that asking questions was disrespectful. I learned that crying was manipulation. I learned that needing things, food outside of mealtimes, comfort after nightmares, help with homework, was being demanding. My room was in the basement. They told guests it was because I liked the privacy, but the truth was simpler, out of sight, out of mind. The basement was unfinished concrete and exposed pipes, with a single small window near the ceiling that let in a rectangle of gray light during the day. My bed was a mattress on the floor. My clothes lived in cardboard boxes. There was a space heater that sometimes worked and a dehumidifier that always smelled like mold. I was 7 when I started understanding that something was wrong. Not wrong with me, I'd already internalized that I was the problem, but wrong with the situation. I went to school, and I saw how other kids' parents dropped them off with hugs and "have a good day, sweetie." I saw how they ran to their moms at pickup, how they were scooped up and held. I watched through windows at parent-teacher conferences where mothers and fathers leaned in, engaged, asking questions about their children's progress. My parents never came to those. They sent my aunt once, and she spent the entire 15 minutes apologizing to my teacher for wasting her time. "We know he's difficult," she said, while I sat there in a too small chair, my feet not quite touching the ground. "We're doing our best with him." My teacher, Mrs. Morrison, who smelled like vanilla and always had colorful chalk dust on her hands, looked uncomfortable. "Actually," she said carefully, "he's one of my best students. Very bright. Very kind to the other children." My aunt smiled that smile adults use when they're dismissing something. "Well, he certainly doesn't show that side at home." I remember the texture of that chair under my hands. Smooth plastic, slightly warm from my grip. I remember counting the tiles on the ceiling, 48 in the room, because that was easier than trying to understand why my aunt was lying. At home, I barely spoke. How could I be difficult if I barely existed? It happened 3 weeks after my 8th birthday. Actually, that's not quite right. My 8th birthday was the day they gave me a card, no gift, just a card from the grocery store with a generic happy birthday and both their signatures, identical and perfectionistic, and told me I was getting old enough to contribute to the household. The incident happened 3 weeks after that. I still don't know exactly what triggered it. That's the thing about living in a house where the rules constantly shift. where the ground beneath your feet is never solid. You stop looking for logic. You just try to survive the next moment, then the next, then the next. It was a Saturday. I remember because there was no school, which meant a whole day of trying to be invisible in that house. My father was in the garage, doing whatever he did out there for hours at a time. My mother was in the kitchen with my aunt and uncle, who came over most weekends. They were drinking wine even though it was 11 in the morning. I could hear their laughter from the basement, sharp and frequent, the kind of laughter that has nothing to do with joy and everything to do with cruelty. I was hungry. This is important to understand, I was always hungry. They fed me, but minimally, and never enough. Breakfast was cold cereal, measured out exactly. Lunch on weekends was a sandwich, one sandwich, nothing more. Dinner was whatever was left over after everyone else had eaten, and I ate it alone in the basement while they watched TV upstairs. But it was only 11, and breakfast had been at 7, and my stomach was eating itself. I made a decision that changed my life. I went upstairs. The stairs from the basement creaked, the third one especially, a long drawn-out groan that announced my presence before I reached the door. I heard the conversation in the kitchen stop. Just stop, mid-sentence, like someone had pressed pause. I opened the door. 3 faces turned to look at me. My mother's expression was the worst, not anger, not even annoyance. Just distaste. Like I was a stain that had appeared on her favorite shirt. "I'm hungry," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Can I have?" "We're having a conversation," my aunt interrupted. She had the same face as my mother, same sharp cheekbones and thin lips, but where my mother was cold, my aunt was cutting. "You're being rude." "But Go back downstairs." My mother didn't raise her voice. She never had to. Her quiet was more frightening than anyone else's screaming. Now. I should have gone. I should have turned around, accepted the gnawing in my stomach, and disappeared back into the basement. But I was 8, and I was so hungry, and for one stupid moment, I thought I had the right to advocate for myself. "I haven't eaten since breakfast," I said. "It's been 4 hours. Can I just have some?" The wine glass hit the wall 6 inches from my head. It exploded in a shower of red liquid and glittering shards, and I felt drops of wine hit my face, warm and sticky. For a second, nobody moved. I stood there, frozen, wine dripping down the wall behind me, my ears ringing from the sound of breaking glass. My uncle stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "You ungrateful little shit," he said, and his voice was quiet too, but in a different way than my mother's. His quiet vibrated with violence. "You have any idea what you cost this family? Any idea how much easier their lives would be without you?" I didn't understand. I was 8. I didn't cost anything. I wore hand-me-downs from neighbors' kids, I ate scraps, I took up space in a basement that was otherwise useless. What did I cost? "Get out," my mother said. I looked at her. "Downstairs?" "Out." She pointed at the front door. "Get out of this house." I thought she meant temporarily. I thought she meant go outside for a while, calm down, come back when we're done with our conversation. I thought this was like being sent to my room, but outdoor version. I went to the front door. I was wearing pajamas, thin cotton pants and a t-shirt with a hole in the armpit. It was October. Not winter cold yet, but no longer warm. I didn't have shoes on. "Now," my uncle added, coming up behind me. His breath smelled like wine and something sour. "Before I do something you'll regret." The door opened. I stepped onto the porch. The concrete was cold under my bare feet. The door closed behind me. I heard the lock click. And I stood there, on that porch, waiting to be let back in. Waiting for my mother to open the door and say, "Okay, you've learned your lesson." Waiting for this to be over. I waited for 20 minutes. Then an hour. Then 2. The neighbor's golden retriever, not our Sunshine, a different golden retriever from 3 doors down, came and sat with me for a while. I put my hand in her warm fur and cried into her neck, and she just sat there, like she understood. When the sun started going down and the October air turned sharp, I walked to the backyard and tried the back door. Locked. I tried my basement window. Too small to climb through, and locked anyway. I knocked on the main door again. Mom? My voice was hoarse from crying. Can I come in? I'm cold. Nothing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for whatever I did. Please. Silence. I spent that night in our backyard shed, curled up on a tarp that smelled like gasoline and grass clippings, shivering so hard my bones hurt. In the morning, I woke up to my father standing in the doorway of the shed. Get up, he said. Get your things. Hope flooded through me, warm and desperate. I was being let back in. But he didn't lead me to the house. He led me to his car. They drove me to a fire station 40 minutes away. I sat in the back seat in my pajamas, my father's jacket draped over my shoulders because I wouldn't stop shaking. Nobody spoke. My mother stared out the window. My father drove with both hands on the wheel, his knuckles white. When we pulled up to the fire station, my mother finally turned around. Tell them you ran away, she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, like she was giving me instructions for a school project. Tell them you don't know your address, you don't know your phone number, you don't know your last name. Can you do that? I was 8 years old. I didn't understand what was happening, but I understood that my survival depended on doing what I was told. I nodded. Good boy, my father said, and those were the last words he ever spoke to me. They walked me to the entrance and told the firefighter on duty that they'd found me wandering on the highway. Then they left. Just got in their car and drove away while I stood there in the firehouse, wrapped in my father's jacket, which I would never get to return. The firefighters were kind. They gave me hot chocolate and a blanket. They asked me my name, and I said I didn't know. They asked where I lived, and I said I didn't know. They asked if I had parents, and I said I didn't know. One of them, a woman with short gray hair and gentle hands, knelt down to my level. Sweetheart, she said, it's okay to be scared. But you need to help us help you. Can you try to remember anything about your family? And I looked at her with 8-year-old eyes and said the only true thing I could say. They didn't want me anymore. I became a statistic. A case number. A file that moved from desk to desk in the foster care system. The boy with no history, no family, no identity beyond what the state assigned me. They gave me a new name. A placeholder name, really, until they could figure out who I actually was. But they never did. Despite investigations, despite attempts to match me to missing children reports, despite everything, I had disappeared so completely from my family's life that there was no evidence I had ever existed. No birth certificate in my name. No school records that couldn't be explained away. No medical records. No photographs. They had erased me before they threw me away. I learned later, much later, that they'd homeschooled me for the first few years, then enrolled me in school under my aunt's address, using her last name. When they got rid of me, they simply stopped enrolling that child. The school assumed the family had moved. My aunt told anyone who asked that her nephew had gone to live with his other relatives. As far as the world was concerned, I had never been theirs to lose. I spent the next 10 years in the foster system. Some homes were okay. Most were indifferent. A few were worse than what I'd left behind, which I didn't think was possible until I lived it. I learned to pack my belongings, what few I had, in under 15 minutes. I learned to sleep light, to trust no one, to keep my head down. I also learned that I was smart. School became my escape. The one place where my value was measurable and earned and couldn't be taken away on a whim. I got straight A's not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because homework was predictable. Study hard, get good grades. Cause and effect. Simple. By the time I was 15, I was taking college courses. By 17, I had a full scholarship to a state university. By 22, I had a master's degree and a job that paid enough for me to finally stop being hungry. But I never forgot. Every single day of those 10 years, then 12, then 15, I remembered the feeling of that cold concrete porch under my bare feet. I remembered the sound of the lock clicking. I remembered the smell of that shed. And I remembered their faces. I started looking for them when I was 25. By then, I had money. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to hire a private investigator. Enough to access databases and records. Enough to start building a case file of my own. It took 3 years. 3 years of dead ends and false leads and moments where I thought I'd never find them, that they'd disappeared as completely as they'd made me disappear. But then, a property record. My father's name attached to a house in a suburb 2 states over. Same house. Same cream-colored siding. Same perfect lawn. They'd never left. They'd thrown me away and just continued on with their lives. I found my birth certificate in a county records office, buried under my aunt's name, filed incorrectly, probably deliberately. I found medical records from when I was 3 and broke my arm. I found a baptism record from a church they'd attended once. I found proof I had existed. More than that, I found proof of what they'd done. Because once I started looking, really looking, I found others. A neighbor who remembered hearing a child crying in the basement. A teacher from my brief time in school who'd filed a concern report that had gone nowhere. A pediatrician who'd noted suspicious bruising. A grocery store clerk who remembered my mother buying food but never anything a child would eat. And I found something else. I found that they'd done it before. There had been another child before me. Her name was Sarah. She would have been my older sister, except she wasn't. She was my aunt and uncle's daughter. She'd lived with my parents for 2 years when my aunt and uncle were going through financial difficulties. Sarah was 6 when she moved in. She was 8 when she disappeared. The official story, she went back to live with her parents when they got back on their feet. The truth, which I pieced together from old neighbors and public records and one brave soul who'd been carrying guilt for 23 years, they'd done to her exactly what they did to me. She'd been found wandering near a shopping mall in a different state, wearing clothes too small for her, unable or unwilling to tell anyone her name. She'd been placed in foster care. She'd aged out of the system at 18 with no family, no history, no identity. I found her on Facebook. It took weeks of searching through profiles, matching ages and locations and details from the investigator's report. But I found her. Sarah Mitchell, the name the state had given her, living in Oregon, working as a veterinary technician, married with 2 kids whose faces filled her feed. I sent her a message at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, my hands shaking so hard I had to retype it 3 times. You lived with your aunt and uncle when you were 6. They sent you away when you were 8. I think we're connected. She responded 4 hours later, who is this? I told her everything. Not in that first message. You can't dump trauma on a stranger, even if that stranger lived your same nightmare. But over weeks, over phone calls, over a meeting at a coffee shop halfway between our 2 cities where we sat across from each other and saw our own ghost staring back, she looked like my aunt. Same sharp cheekbones. Same thin lips. But her eyes were different, softer, survivor eyes. I thought I was crazy, she said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. Her hands were steady, but her voice wasn't. I thought I'd made it up. Some kind of trauma response, you know? False memories. But you're telling me it was real. They really did that. They did it to both of us, I said. And I think we can prove it. Her coffee went cold while I explained what I'd found. The neighbor testimonies. The medical records. The pattern of behavior. The way they'd erased us both from existence and then just moved on. What do you want to do? She asked finally. I looked at her, this woman who was a stranger and a sister all at once, who'd survived the same hell I had, and I told her the truth. I want them to pay. She was quiet for a long time. The coffee shop noise flowed around us, the hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of other people living normal lives, the clink of cups on saucers. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. "Let's burn it all down," she said. We went to the police 3 weeks later, not just any police, we went to the FBI field office in the state where we'd both been abandoned. Child trafficking. Child endangerment. Kidnapping. Filing false reports. Identity fraud. The list of potential charges was long, and we had documentation for all of it. The agent who took our case was a woman named Rita Delgado. She was in her 40s, with black hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen too much. She listened to our story without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting. When we finished, she set down her pen. "This is going to be hard," she said. "You understand that? These cases, when there's this much time passed, when the victims are adults now, they're hard to prosecute. Defense attorneys will say you're misremembering. They'll say you're holding grudges. They'll paint you as damaged adults looking for someone to blame. Let them try," Sarah said. Agent Delgado smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Good. Because I believe you, and I'm going to help you make this stick." The investigation took 8 months. 8 months of interviews and document reviews and forensic accounting to trace how they'd managed to erase us so completely. 8 months of watching agents knock on doors in my old neighborhood, watching security footage from the fire station where I'd been dropped off, watching my entire childhood get dissected and catalogued and turned into evidence. They found more than we expected. My parents had claimed me as a dependent on their taxes for 3 years after abandoning me, collecting the tax benefits while I rotted in the foster system. They'd taken out a life insurance policy on me when I was 4, just enough to cover funeral expenses if something happened, and never canceled it. When investigators dug into their finances, they found similar policies on Sarah. They'd been preparing for us to disappear. Or worse. "We think there might have been others," Agent Delgado told us in month 5. We were in her office, which smelled like burnt coffee and determination. "Other children who passed through their care. We're looking into it." My blood went cold. "How many?" "We're not sure yet. But your mother worked as a foster parent for a brief period in the 90s. 3 children placed with her over 2 years. All removed from her care for various reasons, but none reported what happened to you." "Maybe they were too young to report," Sarah said quietly. "Or too scared. Or they didn't survive," I said. Agent Delgado didn't contradict me. "They found 2 of those 3 children. Both adults now, both carrying scars. One remembered being locked in closets for hours. One remembered going days without food as punishment for minor infractions. Neither had been abandoned like Sarah and I had, but both confirmed a pattern of systematic abuse and emotional cruelty." "It's not enough for trafficking charges," Agent Delgado admitted. "But it's enough for a pattern. It shows jury that this wasn't a one-time mistake. This is who they are." The grand jury indicted them on 12 counts. 2 counts of child endangerment. 2 counts of kidnapping. 2 counts of fraud. 2 counts of filing false reports. 4 counts of tax fraud. Each count carried a maximum sentence of 15 years. My mother fainted when they arrested her. My father didn't say a word. My aunt screamed about persecution and lies, and how dare they believe these damaged children over upstanding citizens. My uncle hired the most expensive lawyer he could find. None of it mattered. We had evidence. We had testimony. We had a paper trail that proved, beyond any doubt, that they had erased 2 children from existence and profited from our absence. The trial was set for 13 months after we first walked into that FBI office. 13 months of preparation. Of going over my testimony again and again until I could recite it in my sleep. Of therapy sessions to make sure I could handle the emotional weight of facing them. Of nightmares where I was 8 years old again, standing on that cold porch, waiting to be let back in. Sarah and I talked every day. Some days we talked about the case. Most days we talked about everything else, her kids, my job, the lives we'd built in spite of them. We were strangers bonded by shared trauma, and somehow that was enough to build a real relationship on. "Are you scared?" she asked me the night before the trial started. I was in my apartment, packing a bag for the 2 weeks I'd be staying near the courthouse. My hands were steady as I folded shirts and packed toiletries, but my heart was racing. Terrified, I admitted. "You?" "Same." A pause. "But also, I don't know." "Excited?" "Is that wrong?" "No," I said. "I feel it too. Like we're finally getting to speak after being silenced for so long." "Yeah," she said softly. "Yeah, exactly that." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. You see courtrooms in movies and they're these grand spaces with high ceilings and dramatic lighting. This one was fluorescent lit and beige, with uncomfortable wooden benches and a smell like old paper and anxiety. But when I walked in on day one and saw them, all 4 of them, sitting in a row behind the defense table, it felt like the most important room in the world. My mother had aged. Gray in her hair now, lines around her mouth. But those eyes were the same. Cold. Calculating. She looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. My father looked smaller than I remembered. Hunched. Diminished. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My aunt had the audacity to look angry. Like we were inconveniencing her by dragging her to trial for child abuse. My uncle stared at me with open hatred. I stared back. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by an assistant district attorney named Marcus Webb. He was young, barely 30, but he spoke with the conviction of someone who believed, deeply, in the righteousness of this case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this case is about erasure. It's about what happens when adults decide that children are inconvenient. It's about 4 people who took 2 innocent children and threw them away like garbage, then went on with their lives as if those children had never existed." He walked them through the timeline. Sarah's abandonment. Mine. The systematic way they'd stripped us of our identities. The financial fraud. The pattern of abuse with other foster children. "The defense is going to try to tell you that this is a case of misremembering," Webb said. "That these 2 adults, now 32 and 30 years old, have confused memories or are looking for someone to blame for their difficult childhoods. But the evidence will show you that this isn't about memory. This is about documentation. Medical records. Tax records. Testimony from neighbors and teachers and firefighters. This is about proof." The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Richard Keller who charged $700 an hour, gave his opening next. "This is a case about false accusations," he said smoothly. "About 2 troubled individuals who have constructed a narrative that allows them to be victims rather than taking responsibility for their own choices. Yes, they were in foster care. Yes, they had difficult childhoods. But to blame my clients, good people who did their best in impossible situations, is not justice. It's revenge." I watched the jury as he spoke. 12 faces, trying to remain neutral, trying to process these 2 competing narratives. A retired teacher. A mechanic. A software developer. A stay-at-home mom. Regular people who would decide whether my childhood had happened the way I said it did. The first witness was the firefighter who'd been on duty the night I was dropped off. He was older now, white beard, retirement age, but he remembered. "A couple brought in this kid," he testified. "Said they found him on the highway. Kid was in pajamas, no shoes, shivering. They said they didn't know who he was, just wanted to make sure he was safe." "Did you find that unusual?" Webb asked. "Hell yes, I found it unusual. You don't just drop a kid off and leave." But they were gone before I could get their license plate. We called the police, started a missing child investigation. "But the kid..." He paused, looking at me. "The kid said he didn't know his name. Didn't know where he lived. Didn't know anything. We thought maybe trauma, you know? Sometimes kids shut down when they're scared. Looking back now, knowing what you know about this case, what do you think happened? I think those people in the car were his parents. And I think they told him to lie. The defense objected. Sustained. But the jury had heard it. Next came neighbors from our old street. Mrs. Chen, who lived next door and remembered hearing crying from the basement. Mr. Rodriguez, who'd thought it was odd that the couple had a dog but he'd never seen a child playing in the yard. A mail carrier who'd delivered packages and noted that there were never any toys visible through the windows. Small things. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they painted a picture. Then came Dr. Patricia Voss, the pediatrician who'd seen me when I was 3 for the broken arm. I noted in my records that I was concerned about the injury, she testified. She was in her 70s now, retired, but her memory was sharp. The parents said he'd fallen downstairs, but the break pattern was inconsistent with that type of fall. It looked more like a direct impact. I asked to speak to the child alone, but the mother refused. I filed a report with Child Services. And what happened with that report? Nothing, as far as I know. Those were different times. Child Services was overwhelmed. And this was just one injury, one suspicion. Not enough to act on. The guilt in her voice was palpable. Webb introduced the tax records next. Year after year of my parents claiming a dependent they'd abandoned. The life insurance policies. The foster care payments my mother had received for children she'd abused. This wasn't neglect, Webb argued. This was calculated. They profited from these children's suffering. On day 4, Sarah testified. I sat in the gallery and watched my mirror image take the stand. She wore a blue dress and her hair pulled back, and she looked so small in that witness box. But her voice was strong. Tell us about your time living with the defendants, Webb prompted, and she did. All of it. The basement room. The hunger. The isolation. The day they drove her to the mall and told her to get lost and never come back. How old were you? 8. Did you know why they were sending you away? No. I thought I'd done something wrong. I spent years thinking if I'd just been better, quieter, less trouble, they would have kept me. And now? She looked directly at my aunt. Now I know it was never about me. It was about them. About their cruelty. The defense cross-examined her aggressively. Keller tried to suggest she was misremembering, confusing different homes, different families. He pointed out gaps in her story, moments she couldn't recall with perfect clarity. Isn't it true that you were in 6 different foster homes between ages 8 and 18? Yes. And isn't it possible that you're conflating memories from different placements? No. How can you be sure? Sarah leaned forward slightly. Because I remember the smell of that basement. I remember the sound of the lock clicking. I remember my aunt's voice telling me that I was a burden they couldn't carry anymore. You don't forget the moment your family throws you away, Mr. Keller. You don't confuse that with anything else. The jury was riveted. On day 7, it was my turn. I took the stand at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The Bible was warm from the previous witness's hand when I placed mine on it. The court clerk asked me to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I swore. Not to God, I'd stopped believing in protective deities around age 9, but to myself. To Sarah. To every child who'd ever been erased. Marcus Webb approached with a gentle smile, the kind you'd use with someone you're afraid might break. He didn't need to worry. I wasn't going to break. Not here. Not now. Please state your name for the record. And here's where it got complicated. Because my name wasn't the name I was born with, that had been taken from me. It wasn't the name the state had given me, I'd changed it legally when I turned 18. It was the name I'd chosen for myself, built for myself, earned. My legal name is, withheld, I said. But I was born, withheld, to the defendants, Catherine and Michael Reynolds. My mother's face went white. They'd been so careful to erase every record, every trace. But I'd found my birth certificate. I'd proven I was theirs. Webb walked me through the early years. The basement room. The isolation. The hunger. I spoke clearly, without emotion, just facts. Date, time, location, event. Like I was reading a police report. Describe the day you were removed from the home, Webb said. So I did. I described the wine glass shattering against the wall. The feeling of drops on my face. The cold porch under my bare feet. The night in the shed. The drive to the fire station. Every detail, precise and clear. What happened after you were left at the fire station? I was placed in emergency foster care. They tried to find my family, but there were no records. My birth certificate had been filed incorrectly under my aunt's information. My school records were under a different name. As far as the system could tell, I didn't exist. How did that make you feel? The first hint of emotion cracked through my voice. Like they were right. Like I was nothing. A mistake that could be erased. And when did you first start looking for your biological family? When I was 25. After I'd graduated college, built a career, made something of myself. I wanted to prove. I stopped, swallowed. I wanted to prove that I existed. That I mattered. That they couldn't just make me disappear. Webb let the silence sit for a moment. Did you find them? Yes. And what did you discover? That they'd never left. Same house, same life, same perfect lawn. Like nothing had ever happened. Like I'd never happened. I could see some jury members shifting in their seats, uncomfortable. Good. They should be uncomfortable. Webb introduced photograph after photograph. The house. The basement window. The shed. All taken during the investigation, but matching exactly what I'd described from 22 years ago. How can you be sure these are the same locations? Keller would undoubtedly ask on cross-examination, but Webb headed him off. The defendant's home has been in their possession since 1985. County records show no major renovations to the basement or shed. These structures are identical to what existed when the witness was 8 years old. Then came the hard part. I'd like to direct your attention to the medical records entered as evidence item 47, Webb said. This is a record from when you were 3 years old, documenting a broken arm. Do you remember this injury? No. I was too young. The doctor who examined you, Dr. Patricia Voss, testified earlier that she suspected abuse. Did you experience physical abuse in the home? I thought about lying. About saying yes, about making them seem even worse than they were. But I'd sworn to tell the truth. Not physical abuse in the traditional sense, I said carefully. They didn't hit me. But neglect is abuse. Isolation is abuse. Starving a child is abuse. Making a child feel like their very existence is wrong, that's abuse too. Objection, Keller said, half standing. The witness is not qualified to define abuse. Sustained. Mr. Webb, please keep to factual questions. Webb nodded. Let me rephrase. Can you describe the conditions in which you lived? So I did. The cold basement. The rationed food. The hours spent alone. The lack of birthday celebrations, Christmas gifts, any acknowledgement that I was a child who deserved love. They provided shelter, I said. They provided minimal food. But they didn't provide what a child actually needs. They didn't provide affection or attention or any indication that my life had value. And after they abandoned you, did you ever hear from them again? Never. No birthday cards? No calls? No attempts to find you? Nothing. For 22 years, nothing. Webb concluded his direct examination with the tax records, walking the jury through each year my parents had claimed me as a dependent while I was living in foster care. This shows a clear intent to profit from the witness's existence while simultaneously abandoning him, Webb said. This isn't neglect. This is calculated exploitation. Then it was Keller's turn. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket, giving me a smile that was all professional courtesy and no warmth. Mr. Withheld, he began. You've testified that you lived in 6 foster homes between ages 8 and 18. Is that correct? Yes. And some of those homes were difficult, weren't they? Some were. In fact, you've had therapy for PTSD related to your experiences in foster care, haven't you? Yes. So isn't it possible that some of your memories, these very traumatic memories, have become confused over time? That you're attributing experiences from one home to another? I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who was being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to convince a jury that my childhood hadn't happened the way I said it did. No, I said. It's not possible. How can you be certain? Because I remember specific details. The crack in the basement ceiling that looked like a face. The sound the third stair made, that long creak. The smell of my father's jacket that he put over my shoulders on the drive to the fire station, Old Spice and motor oil. Those aren't generic foster care memories, Mr. Keller. Those are specific to that house, that family, that abandonment. He tried a different angle. You have a master's degree in psychology, don't you? Yes. So you're aware of the concept of false memories? How trauma can cause the brain to construct narratives that feel real but may not be accurate. I'm aware of the concept. And yet you're absolutely certain your memories are accurate? I'm certain. But more importantly, the evidence is certain. You can't false memory your way into tax records, Mr. Keller. You can't imagine a birth certificate. You can't hallucinate testimony from firefighters and neighbors and doctors. My memories are corroborated by documentation. He didn't like that answer. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw. Let's talk about your relationship with Sarah Mitchell, he said. You didn't know her before this case, correct? Correct. So how did you find her? Through investigation. Once I discovered what had happened to me, I looked for other potential victims. Isn't it possible that you and Ms. Mitchell collaborated on your stories? Made sure they aligned? The implication was clear, we'd conspired to frame innocent people. I kept my voice level. Our stories align because we lived through the same thing. We both compared notes, yes. Because we both wanted to make sure we weren't crazy. We wanted validation that this had really happened to both of us. But we didn't construct a false narrative. We reconstructed a true one. And you expect this jury to believe that 2 separate children were abandoned by the same family in the exact same way? Yes, I said. Because that's exactly what happened. Because when you find a system that works, that lets you get rid of an inconvenient child and face no consequences, why wouldn't you use it again? Keller went after me for another hour. He questioned my credibility. My motives. My mental health. He suggested I was bitter about my childhood and looking for someone to blame. He pointed out that I'd waited until I was 30 to come forward, suggesting the delay meant the claims were fabricated. I answered every question with the same calm certainty. Because I wasn't that 8-year-old boy anymore, standing on a cold porch, hoping to be let back in. I was 30 years old. I had a career, a home, a life I'd built from nothing. They couldn't make me feel small anymore. When Keller finally sat down, Webb had one redirect question. Mr. Withheld, the defense has suggested you're doing this for revenge. Is that true? I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. I'm doing this for justice. There's a difference. Revenge would be me making them suffer the way they made me suffer, leaving them somewhere cold and scared and alone. Justice is making sure they face consequences for their actions. Making sure they can never do this to another child. That's not revenge. That's protection. Webb nodded. No further questions. I stepped down from the witness stand. My legs were shaking. I'd been up there for 4 hours, but I'd done it. I'd told my story. I'd faced them and I hadn't broken. The trial lasted 3 weeks total. After my testimony came financial experts who walked the jury through the fraud. Child psychologists who explained the long-term impact of childhood abandonment. Sarah's testimony on redirect, where she broke down crying describing how she'd blamed herself for decades. The defense called character witnesses. Friends of my parents who testified that they were good people, involved in their church, kind to their neighbors. None of those witnesses had known I existed. My mother testified in her own defense. She claimed I'd been a troubled child, violent and uncontrollable. She said they'd done everything they could, but I was dangerous. She cried on the stand, delicate tears that didn't reach her eyes. We were afraid, she said. Afraid of what he might do. We thought if we got him help through the state system, professionals who knew how to handle difficult children, it was a good performance. Convincing, even if you didn't know it was a lie. But Webb destroyed her on cross-examination. If your son was so dangerous, so troubled, why are there no medical records documenting this violence? No hospital visits for injuries he caused? No police reports? She faltered. We handled it internally. You handled a violently troubled 3-year-old internally? When he broke his arm, the injury that Dr. Voss suspected was abuse, was that him being violent? That was an accident. Which is it, Mrs. Reynolds? Was your son violently uncontrollable, or was his broken arm an accident? Because those two narratives don't align. She couldn't answer. Webb pressed on. You claim you sought help for your son through the state system. But you didn't seek help, did you? You abandoned him at a fire station 40 miles from your home and told him to lie about his identity. That's not seeking help. That's erasing a child. I did what I thought was best. For whom? For him, or for you? She didn't answer. My father didn't testify. His lawyer advised against it. My aunt and uncle testified, both claiming they had minimal involvement, that they'd trusted my parents to know what was best for their children. The tax records proved that was a lie. My uncle had co-signed some of the fraudulent filings. Closing arguments happened on a Friday. Webb was masterful. He walked the jury through every piece of evidence, every testimony, building a narrative that was impossible to deny. 2 children, systematically erased. A family that profited from their absence. A pattern of cruelty disguised as parenting. The defense wants you to believe this is about false memories and revenge, he said. But the evidence doesn't lie. Tax records don't lie. Birth certificates don't lie. Medical records don't lie. The only people who have lied in this courtroom are the defendants. Keller's closing was smooth but hollow. He couldn't refute the evidence, so he attacked the victims. We were damaged. We were unreliable. We wanted money. We weren't suing civilly. This was purely criminal. We wanted attention. These are not bad people, he said, gesturing to my parents. These are ordinary people who made difficult choices in impossible situations. That's not criminal. That's human. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 48 hours that felt like 48 years. Sarah and I waited in a hotel room nearby, barely sleeping, barely eating, just waiting for the call. It came at 3:17 p.m. on Sunday. Verdict reached. Report to the courthouse. The courtroom was packed when we arrived. Media had picked up the story. Children abandoned and erased by family face them in court, and suddenly everyone wanted to watch justice happen or fail. The jury filed in. I tried to read their faces, looking for any hint, but they were deliberately neutral. The judge, a severe woman in her 60s named Honor Patricia Sterling, called for order. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. A middle-aged black man who'd been a teacher for 30 years. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of child endangerment against Catherine Reynolds, how do you find? Guilty. My mother made a sound, small, wounded, disbelieving. On the charge of child endangerment against Michael Reynolds? Guilty. One by one, the foreman read the verdicts. 12 counts. 12 guilties. My aunt collapsed into sobs. My uncle sat stone-faced. My father stared at his hands. My mother turned and looked directly at me. For the first time in 22 years, we made real eye contact and I smiled, not a big smile. Just enough. Just enough for her to know that I'd won. Sentencing happened 6 weeks later. The prosecution asked for the maximum on all counts, 15 years per charge, to run consecutively. The defense begged for leniency, for concurrent sentences, for probation. Judge Sterling was not in a lenient mood. I've been on the bench for 23 years, she said, looking down at the defendants. I've seen a lot of terrible things. But what you four did, it's a special kind of cruelty. You didn't just abandon these children. You erased them. You made them non-persons. You profited from their suffering. And then you went on with your lives as if they'd never existed. She sentenced them to 12 years per count on the child endangerment charges, 10 years per count on the fraud charges, to run consecutively. My mother, 44 years. My father, 44 years. My aunt, 40 years. My uncle, 40 years. Given their ages, my parents were in their 60s, my aunt and uncle in their 50s. These were effectively life sentences. They would die in prison. When the gavel came down, I felt. I don't know what I expected to feel. Triumph? Relief? Joy. What I actually felt was tired. Just bone deep, soul tired. Sarah squeezed my hand. We stood together as they were led away in handcuffs, my mother still crying, my father still silent, my aunt screaming about appeals and justice and corruption. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. How do you feel? What do you want other victims to know? Do you forgive them? I stopped at that last question. Turned to the reporter, young woman, eager eyes, microphone thrust in my face. No, I said. I don't forgive them. Forgiveness is for people who are sorry. They're not sorry they did it. They're sorry they got caught. There's a difference. What do you hope comes from this? I thought about that 8-year-old boy on the cold porch. About Sarah at the mall. About all the other children who might have been next if we hadn't stopped them. I hope, I said slowly, that this shows other survivors that your voice matters. That your story matters. That even if you were erased, you can write yourself back into existence. You can fight back. You can win. It's been 3 years since the trial. I still have nightmares sometimes. Still wake up at 3 a.m. feeling like I'm 8 years old again, cold and scared and alone. But they're less frequent now. And when they happen, I remind myself, I'm not that child anymore. I survived. I won. Sarah and I talk weekly. Her kids call me uncle, which makes me cry every single time. I'm teaching them that family isn't just blood, it's the people who choose you, who show up for you, who prove through their actions that you matter. I've started volunteering with foster youth organizations. Helping kids navigate the system that raised me. Showing them that there's life after trauma, that you can build something beautiful from ruins. Someone asked me recently if I regret coming forward. If it was worth it. The pain of reliving everything, the public exposure, the years of fighting. I thought about it. Then I thought about the letter I received last month from a woman in Minnesota. She'd seen the trial coverage. It had given her the courage to report her own childhood abuse. She's building a case now. I thought about the policy changes that happened in our state after the trial. New laws requiring cross-referencing of birth certificates and school records. Audits of families claiming dependents they don't live with. Safety nets that might catch the next child before they disappear. I thought about my mother, in prison, unable to hurt another child ever again. Yes, I told them. It was worth it. Because here's what I learned, being erased doesn't mean you're gone. It just means you have to work harder to prove you exist. And I exist. I existed when I was 8 years old on that porch. I existed when I was in the foster system. I existed when I was searching for them. I existed when I walked into that courtroom. And I exist now, not as their victim, but as a survivor who refused to stay silent. They tried to throw me away. Instead, I threw them away. And unlike what they did to me, what I did to them was justice. Last week, I drove past the old house. I don't know why I did it. Some combination of closure-seeking and self-torture, probably. But I found myself on that street, pulling up to that cream-colored house with the perfect lawn. It's for sale now. The bank seized it after my parents were convicted, part of the asset forfeiture to pay restitution. Not that Sarah and I wanted their money, we donated every cent to foster care organizations. But the state took the house anyway. I parked across the street and just looked at it. The lawn isn't perfect anymore. There are weeds in the flower beds. One of the shutters hangs crooked. The paint is starting to peel. Without anyone to maintain the facade, the house is showing its true nature, deteriorating, hollow. Kind of perfect, really. I thought about going to the door. About looking in the windows. About seeing that basement one more time. But I didn't. Because that house doesn't own me anymore. Those memories don't define me. I'm not the scared 8-year-old who lived in those walls. I'm the 33-year-old who put his abusers in prison. I'm the survivor who found his voice. I'm the man who wrote himself back into existence. I started the car and drove away, and I didn't look back. Not even once.